Okay, there we are. We're recording. So welcome back to SD 555, Intermediate System Dynamics Modeling. And we started our journey to build a One Health model of the Lyme disease problem, right? So we talked last time about conceptualizing the problem. I kind of showed you Suzanne's hand-drawn reference mode. And there's an oscillatory pattern, right? So the oscillatory pattern is economic activity, right? And when it's up, people tend to adopt dogs, either from a shelter or from sort of just their yard, their area. In Arkansas, it's a more rural state, and Suzanne does not live in Little Rock or anything like that. So it's a more rural area. And so dogs, feral dogs, will also show up in people's yards. And everybody likes dogs, unless they're cat people, I guess. But so people in good economic times will adopt them, feed them, house them. If they're sick, help them. But when economic times get bad, and people don't have enough money to support the dogs, they'll either bring them to a shelter, or if they don't, they're lazy or whatever, one's not nearby, whatever, they'll just release them into the wild. Or it could be the shelter's full. So shelter capacity it's a limiting factor, right? And of course, when the dogs are feral, they're running around in the wooded areas and whatever, and they're acting as hosts for the ticks that have Lyme disease. So a tick, if it has Lyme disease and latches on and takes a blood meal, it passes the disease to the dog or to a deer or to a human for that matter. Or if the tick does not have it, but the host does have it, it receives the infection from the host. The ticks go through 4 stages: eggs, larva, nymph, and adult. And then the adults lay the eggs, and there's a feedback loop there. And so then when the people adopt the dogs, if they're infected, the ticks can get into the house, and they drop off and they molt, and then they look for another blood host, which could be a human. So you get the idea. So humans can get Lyme disease from hiking around in the woods, but they can also get it from the dogs, right? So and the shelters, they have capacity. At some point they can't accept any more dogs. So how do they get rid of dogs? Well, hopefully they're adopted, but they're also shipped out of state or euthanized. And obviously they don't want to euthanize them if they can help it. But after a length of stay, if nobody has adopted them and they can't ship them out of state, well, then they euthanize them. In not all shelters, but a lot of them do, just because it's a crowding thing, right? So you have to deal with that. So as you might imagine, there's a lot going on here, right? And we conceptualized, we talked about where there has to be some kind of economic sector, right? There has to be a owned dogs sector, a feral dogs sector, and a dogs in a shelter sector at a minimum in light of the narrative or the story, right? And one of the problems was, okay, we saw the reference mode from Suzanne. I don't know, I can pull it up again if you want, but the point is it was, I think it said economic activity, right? So when economic activity is high, it's good for dogs, and when it's down, it's bad for dogs. This is very common. You'll go into a consulting engagement or whatever, some situation where, you're working with let's call them a client or a group of experts and stakeholders. And that's what they'll tell you. They'll tell you things like, well, economic activity, when it changes. Now you have to decipher, you have to hear that and say to yourself, okay, how would I model that? How would I capture economic activity? Okay. So sometimes it'll say, here is some data on the unemployment rate. It goes up and down. And they say, aha, if that's the reference mode, I know exactly what that is. But sometimes it's a little vague, economic activity. Now you might ask them, well, what do you mean by economic activity? And sometimes they can say, what more specifically, I'm referring to whatever. Or they might say, I don't know, economic activity. So now you got to try and decipher what that means. Okay. So remember, these are models, they're not real. So we have a little leeway in trying to interpret a concept from a client, from something that's been written that we're trying to model, base a model on or whatever. Okay, so that's kind of, so, and then what are we after? We're trying to see how can we, well, if it's a single attribute scoring mechanism, I guess we would say it would be what? Less, if the number of cases of Lyme disease in humans goes down, that's better, right? I suppose if it goes to 0, it's solved, right? But might there be some other aspects to what we mean by a good One Health environment, economy, human world, animal world interaction thing? Is it just less Lyme disease, or are there other aspects that we might consider? Any thoughts on that? Is it a multi-attribute scoring function instead of a single variable?
It depends on who's funding the project.
Yes, good. That's actually a good answer. Let me just pull the door here. My dog is, well, who knows what upstairs. Yeah, so it depends, right? Who's the client, right? That's a good answer. But just spitballing here for a minute, what else might, like, what if I said, ooh, policy number 5 works really well. It eradicated all Lyme disease. I killed every dog in Arkansas. Success, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably gonna want to have, like you're alluding to, you want to have maybe your main aspect to the policy.
Okay. Or
if the burden of the disease above some level, then you might have one type of policy. Or
okay, so yeah, okay, so let's say, oh, how dare you even put that concept in my head? I'm a dog. I have a dog, and we love dogs. I'll just burn down every inch of woodland or any habitat for ticks, burn it to the ground, pave it over, paint it green.
Yeah, I can see like environmental concerns being a part of it as well.
Yeah.
Like a lot of pesticides are really bad for the environment and for public health.
actually, NASA, is it NASA, Hassan? His work was in Binghamton, and he said that the ticks were encroaching on paved paths and stuff like that. So it wasn't like so
I'll just pass a policy. Everybody has to stay inside their house. You can't leave.
yeah.
Yeah, they actually have been
Lyme disease will go,
they've been spraying for mosquitoes mostly and ticks, I think, in my neighborhood. But the local Facebook page has been exploding because doesn't know what the health effects are, and I guess they didn't do a good job educating people. But yeah.
Right. Okay. So, this is just food for thought. It's not like there's an answer in the back of the book and we know what it is. I'm just trying to get you to get to that answer. It's a typical question you might ask in a modeling engagement, a consulting engagement is, well, how are we defining success, or how are we defining better or improved or even solved? And it's almost never a single, in a toy model, as a class homework exercise, you often just give a single attribute to make it, because people are learning, right? But in the real world, there's usually, particularly if you got different kinds of stakeholders in the room. And they don't necessarily agree with one another, or they have different interests, they have different values, right? You know, you have to kind of think about a multi-attribute scoring mechanism to rank simulation experiments and what have you as we get them. So we don't have to decide that just at this moment, but I wanted to plant that seed to make sure we're, you know, we're considering that as we go along. All right, so now I gave you a little bit of an assignment last week to see if you can, you know, we did the helicopter view. I think I lost the conceptualizations. I think I did it in Stella, right? And I think we lost that. You want me to quickly rebuild it, or just or everybody remembers it? The modules. Should I quickly rebuild it?
Maybe. I don't know.
Okay. Okay. Let's rebuild it quick. Hang on. Okay, sure. Okay. Let's make this a little bigger. All right. So as I recall, we said there could be something like an owned dog sector. So these are the households who have a dog. We can have a feral dog sector. So those are the ones running loose. You can have a dogs in the shelter. And we could probably have a economic sector. Now, again, you know, how did we come up with this? These sectors, it's from the narrative, right? It wasn't my narrative. It was Suzanne telling me this stuff. We used to meet like several years ago, once a week or thereabouts. And she would explain all this stuff to me, being a veterinarian. So, okay, you know, listening to the story, it's becoming clear, you know, after a while, you start to think about, okay, like what's important here in light of the dynamics that are being described. They release them to the wild, they bring them in from the wild, they bring them to a shelter, they adopt them from a shelter when economic conditions change. So you hear all that, and you're kind of thinking as a modeler, okay, I need the following sort of chess pieces in my model, right? And of course, these things are going to interact with one another. And of course, we can maybe turn this off. So, you know, it's going to look something like this. You know, we're just spitballing here at this point, but, and of course, then there's going to be more interactions, right? So it's going to be something like this, and so forth. So, you know, we had a basic sort of helicopter overview sector diagram, if you will, even though confusing us even more, sectors are not modules, they're different. I just call them sectors because that's how I kind of learned it. So then the way I like to proceed is to say, all right, I got kind of a conceptual overview. I'm in my modeling helicopter, hovering above the model, looking down onto the various sectors. They might even be called super sectors. If you want to call the level below them sectors and the level below those subsectors, whatever, call them what you want, doesn't matter. And then you say, let's pick one to get going. And I think I asked everybody to start with the economic sector. Now we've dove in and we're one level down. There's nothing here at the moment, right? And because kind of the story is, it involves the, you know, economic activity, right? So I said, why don't you try over the following week, you know, last week to this week, to come up with something, right? So did anybody come up with anything at this point that they are willing to offer as a as a possibility. Obviously, we're not going to model the US economy. We probably don't need the Federal Reserve System in here. Probably don't need international trade. Right? We probably, you know, you have to think about, you know, we're not trying to model the economy. We're trying to model economic activity that when it changes would cause people to dump dogs or adopt dogs. So what might that be?
It probably makes sense to start with the business cycle and track things like employment, income. Yeah, I guess I would start with the business cycle.
Okay. So, yeah, so most likely what Suzanne was describing was.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Oh, speaking of Suzanne, yeah, we can hear you. Hello, are you in your car?
I'm in my car. I'm gonna drive here. The weather's kind of crummy, but I can talk. If I tell you I've got to focus for a second, I will, but it should be, once I get on the interstate, it should be good.
Okay. Drive
I'm just
safely.
gonna
Bill.
leave my mic on so I don't have to turn it on and off.
Okay. Sounds good. Drive safely and welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So, all right. So, you know, economic activity that would lead to adopting a dog from a shelter or, you know, taking one in that's in your yard or whatever, probably relates to jobs, like being employed. So, you know, that's probably on the table. And so how would you model employment? What do you think you would do? So before you answer, what's the thing that I said we typically don't want to do if we can help it? And we're doing it right now. Remember, what did I say? You're going, what the hell did he say? He says a lot. The guy rambles on and on. Every once in a while, there's a nugget in there. We don't want to do what? Sit and stare at
A blank page.
a blank page of electronic paper if we can help it. Now, sometimes you have to, because sometimes nobody's done anything remotely near what you need done. But if somebody might have, perhaps we should ask the question, has anybody produced a small-ish model that we could use as a sector? Not necessarily we just plop it in here. We might have to modify things, but a model that might prove a starting point for sort of regional or county-wide economic activity involving employment, as Najla suggested. Yes, would that be reasonable? So before we go any further, does anybody after studying system dynamics for a while have any thoughts where we might look? Because we've covered famous models and whatever to some degree. We obviously didn't examine every single thing that's been done over the last 60 years, but we looked at big stuff.
I would think something like urban dynamics.
Ah, okay. So, right, exactly right. So urban dynamics, good. And Najla, I think your hand was up.
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
Nathan.
yeah. I was trying to say that we did something similar in college class. I mean, not similar, but sort of similar about stray dogs.
Mm-hmm.
That probably has some similar dynamics involved.
Okay. Yeah. So the question becomes, has anybody done anything in this area specifically, or at least tangentially, where we have a starting point rather than I got to look at this white screen here and try and think of it, invent it, right? Like I say, sometimes you do, but often it's good to do a search or be familiar with the literature, right, in your field and have some thought as to what might be relevant. Now, when I was doing this, I thought of 3 different things. And I'm not saying this is the way I'm doing it is the way to do it. It is a way to do it. I don't think there's anything that says it's right or wrong, the way you approach this sort of thing, within reason, right? But the three things that I thought about were, yes, urban dynamics, but I thought, I don't know that I'd want to grab Jay's model and throw the whole thing in here. Because first of all, it's a city model. And we kind of said that, this tick problem is usually when you're walking around downtown Boston, or I guess Little Rock is the closest thing to Suzanne, probably, right? Little Rock.
Right, Little Rock or Portsmouth. Although I have had people tell me they don't need tick and flea control products because they live in a gated community and have diagnosed tick-borne diseases in their pets. So they're non-discriminatory about socioeconomic boundaries.
Okay. But, if I'm walking around Boston, I'm not worried about getting ticks on me and getting Lyme disease. If I'm running around the woods around Sterling, which is a much more rural community, that's a consideration. In fact, a retired WPI prof I knew really well also lived in Sterling, and he used to go hiking in the woods all around where we live, and he got Lyme disease like really, really, really bad. Stan Selkow. So I used to be a runner, till my knees and the rest of my body went to hell. So I always be out running, and Stan driving around. He was a computer scientist, and when he'd see me running, as he'd drive, he'd go really fast by me and he'd lay on the horn, and it's scared the living hell out of me because I'd be running along, right? And then I'd look up and he'd be giving me the finger outside his window. And I go, oh, that's just Stan. But he used to go in the woods all the time, and he got it. He didn't die. It wasn't diagnosed right away. And he got super, super, super sick from it. So, so I am cognizant of it in Sterling, and I've seen the things leaping on my dog, not my current dog, my dachshund we used to have. I'd be walking her, not in the street, maybe 2 feet from the curb, but the grassy area was longish grass. And you could see the little things leaping like 2 feet from the whatever weeds or whatever the hell they were onto my dog. And so, depending on where you are, you're cognizant of this. So yes, urban dynamics or introduction to urban dynamics would be a place to look, right? But I'm thinking, is it really an urban setting, or maybe it's not, or, so anyway, but that, if I had no other idea, that's what I would have grabbed. That I probably would have done Urban One or something out of the book, absent any other information. What else? What other thing? We covered this in 550 when we did oscillation. So wait, how did I think of that? Well, what's the reference mode? Economic activity is going up and down. So we got to have something that oscillates. Okay, now we could exogenously drive the economic sector. The economic sector could be just a single converter with a sine wave in it, right? We could add a little noise if you wanted. Do we want to do that? So let's stop sharing until we're really, because it's a little teeny squares. So why not do that? Or could we do that?
I mean,
Drive
that's
the
kind of
economic
what I-
sector with a sine wave.
That's kind of what I was thinking when I suggested starting with the business cycles.
Okay. So we could do that, right? Any other thoughts?
Could also map actual data, which is going to be similar to a sine curve, probably. If you detrend it.
Okay, so instead of making a synthetic driving data, drive it with actual data from some region, county, state, or whatever. We have to think about what we mean by the area. Okay. Sure.
I don't think this has to do with the sine wave specifically, but I see the biggest economic impact of Lyme disease being unemployment, or people being on, some type of workers' comp, not able to to be employed. So I would probably have that as as my main stock, just thinking.
Okay, so I think what you're trying to say to me is that the question to answer or ask and answer when you're considering an exogenous driving factor is there feedback from the other sectors to the economic sector? And then is there at least one major feedback loop or not?
Right.
So if it's the weather,
Mm.
because weather affects ticks, do ticks affect the weather?
No.
So probably to have the weather exogenously, and you could have it with noise or whatever, or if there's a seasonal, winter, summer, whatever, that's probably okay. Yes, because you're thinking in terms of feedback, right?
Mm.
Weather impacts ticks, weather impacts economic activity. If there's a blizzard, you close down, but those things don't impact the weather. So that this is how a system dynamicist should think about it. So then that's okay to be exogenous. The business thing, economic activity, it's like economic activity affects dogs, adoptions, separations, and the tick thing. But then does it feedback to impact the economic sector? And the answer is, yeah, it could in terms of healthcare costs and being out of work and what have you. So in that sense, we probably don't necessarily want to think about driving it exogenously unless you say, well, we could do that temporarily. But fully understanding that we'll remove the exogenous thing and put in an endogenous thing later, right? But we've elected to start with the economic sector. So I guess that's off the table. But that, again, I'm trying to articulate kind of how I would think about it. That sort of internal questions I would ask myself as I'm kind of noodling through how would I do this, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so, go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything else.
Sorry.
I didn't have anything else. I was just
Oh,
agreeing.
okay. So, and exogenously driving it is probably maybe okay as a test input or a temporary placeholder, but we probably want to think about making it endogenous in some fashion. Okay. So therefore, is there anything to help us? We said, well, the urban dynamics literature, there might be something there, like the Introduction to Urban Dynamics book has simpler urban models. So that's maybe a possibility. Another possibility was again, in terms of how did I think about this? Well, the reference mode that Suzanne drew had an oscillatory time shape, if you remember. So do I have any simple economic model that generates an oscillatory time shape? And in 550, when we talk about oscillation, the answer is yes. There's a little model of inventory and workers, right? So I thought, well, that could probably get us there. Okay. Do you guys all remember that model? I don't know if you remember from 550. Let me see if I can resurrect that real quick. Because I know when I say you will, of course, all remember that. And then it's like, well, maybe you do, or maybe you don't. I don't know. Let's see if I can quickly resurrect this thing. Hang on here. Question again is, where did I stash it? Okay, so this is from 550. This guy here. So we have inventory and labor, and it oscillates in response to a step. Now that's a one-time shock. We could, with some noise, we could keep it oscillating, right? So I was thinking maybe just plop this guy in there, right? That wouldn't be horrible, right? So we have a second order system here, right? Where we got a major negative loop here and a minor negative loop, right? So here's the target a desired amount of inventory, and you correct for inventory, and you correct for what you're losing, right? And that would be, well, that's what you want this flow to be. You want this flow in to correct over here and match what's going out, but you have to use people to do the production. Well, how many people do you need? Well, it depends on how many widgets each person can make per whatever it is, week or whatever I did this modeling. And that's your desired labor, but then labor, you can't change labor instantly. And then you use the labor you have along with its productivity to make this stuff. Start in equilibrium, shock it out, and it will oscillate. And if you use noise, its natural tendency is to oscillate. Okay, so we could do that. Okay, we could have used that. I didn't do that, but that leaped to mind. All right, so what did I use as a starting point? I didn't literally just plop this in here, but I used this as a starting point. And again, I'm not saying it is the way to do it. It is a way to do it. I remember this paper by Nat Mass and Don Koch. It's from the D memos. I couldn't find at home, so it's probably in my WPI office, the actual paper. So this is incomplete, this D memo. But there is what Nat Mass and Don Koch did was a little system dynamics model for a bank in Florida. So the Florida economy, elements of a system dynamics approach. So it's kind of what we call a regional economic model. It's not an urban model. Now, in regional economics, an economic region does not necessarily correspond to state or political boundaries. So I used to live when I lived in Indiana, in an area called Michiana, because we lived right on the Michigan-Indiana border. So the economic region was Michiana. The airport was Michiana Regional Airport. But it was two different political entities, the state of Michigan and the state of Indiana. So regional urban economic regions economic regions don't necessarily match perfectly state boundaries, but this is probably okay for a regional model, not necessarily an urban model. Okay. All right. So, you can go through this thing if you want. But here is, and this is incomplete. Here is the model. Okay. And I had remembered, I don't remember why I knew this one. And I remember distinctly that I found not just the incomplete D memo, but I found the published paper. And it was in kind of like a newsletter for this bank. And you can see they're changing their mind here. You can see they've made hand corrections from business whatever to business creation. You scratch stuff out here and whatever. So it's incomplete. And you can see here's their plots. The time series plots, which are not there. There's no equations, right? But it's a starting point, right? That's my point. It's a start, and I don't remember if the actual thing that was published had the equations. And next time I get to my office at school, I'm going to dig around and see if I can find it. So we have at least some starter dough here, right? Now, one of the skills is going to be, can you decipher what's been done here? Even if you want to just exactly replicate this, could you figure it out? There's a little bit of reverse engineering, a little bit of a guessing game, right? And then you can ask, does this get us where we want to be? So let's tap the brakes for a minute and say, what do you think? I mean, obviously you're just seeing this now for the first time. So we've got, what do we got here? We got population of the state of Florida or a county or Michiana, whatever region, doesn't matter. And you've got in-migration and you got out-migration. Okay.
Yeah,
And
you're missing, I mean, this is like normal, like everything's working. You have normal like growth and decline. you know, with those fractions, but you don't have anything to do with if you want to bring in the intersection with the disease. There's nothing that would have a flow effect for the population, your labor force. That's the population, but your labor force doesn't have anything related to, you know, the readiness of the labor force.
Okay, so it's not exactly what we need.
But I mean, it has the basic dynamics though of, you know,
Okay, that's what I'm after here is,
Yeah.
so we got to say, you know, is it the right size? Again, I don't know. It's not like I know the answer. I'm literally, I'm not quite building it in real time, but this is kind of the thing. I'm like, all right, I'm looking at this guy and going, all right, I know kind of what I need. I don't want to drop in the whole US economy. I don't want to drop in the urban dynamics model. I need something that is economic activity-ish, but not necessarily urban-ish. And, you know, so, you know, what do we got here? We got people and businesses. Go ahead, Nisha.
I was just gonna say that you could insert the Lyme disease, the effects on productivity, or the effects on the labor force in that normal labor, or you could add in a converter, you know, to multiply by the normal labor force participation fraction, and then add the effect of, you know, having people out sick with Lyme disease, or
Right.
people who are permanently less productive because of Lyme disease because they're disabled or something.
Right. Okay. So what you're saying, I think, is that this might get us there, that you could imagine modifying it a bit to represent the Lyme disease issue. Okay. So what do we got here? We got people coming in and people going out. So what do demographers say about in and out migration and what have you? First of all, there's no births and deaths. Okay. So that might be an issue. I'm not sure. But with in and out migration, and this, you know, they were modeling, you know, broad economic activity for the state of Florida, I guess, is people are always leaving. You notice, can you tell what molecule this is? Right here. Does that look familiar? Now, again, this is not an introductory class. So you can you recognize? Now we don't see the equations here, so we have to do a little bit of guessing, educated guessing, but does that look like a molecule you're familiar with? You know, ice cube melting on a hot asphalt driveway, right?
Yeah, like a
Half-life.
like
Yeah.
a death rate.
Yeah, exactly right. So you should say, you know, aha, I'm pretty sure I know what that is. Okay, so what this is saying is people are always leaving. They're going to a cloud, so we don't know, the model doesn't know where they're going. They're just leaving. They're leaving the model. Okay. And that's true of the demographers say that people are always leaving. If you disaggregated population by income level or educational attainment, usually they're correlated, the people with more education, higher income, have higher rates of out-migration. So this fraction here would be bigger because people, they complete their education and then they have more opportunities and they go. And the people with less education have less opportunities. They tend to stay more. So people are just always leaving. So that's a very common demographic thing. The question is, do more people arrive than people who are leaving? If so, then the population grows, not counting births and deaths. And if it's the same, it's the same. And obviously, if people are always leaving and not enough people are coming in to replace them, well, then the region is losing population. Okay. So, you know, nothing alarming there to a demographer so far. So some fraction of the population is in the labor force. So there's a normal labor force participation rate. That's right out of macroeconomics. So not everybody in the population participates in the labor force. How do you participate in the labor force? Does anybody know? What does that mean to an economist?
Have a job.
Okay, you have a job or
You're an employer.
well, that's a job. You got to be employed, or if you're unemployed, you have to be actively looking for a job.
Doing a job.
So, the government will survey people and they'll say, have you been employed over the last week in a job that pays you money? Can't be volunteer work. And if you say no, they'll ask you, as the Bureau of Labor Statistics, have you actively sought a job over the last 2 weeks? And if the answer is no, well, then you're not in the labor force because you're not working for a job that pays you money and you're not trying to find work. Now you can say, I'm discouraged. I tried the previous 2 weeks, but it doesn't matter. For the U3, you're not in the labor force. So you either got to be working for money, employed, or you have to be actively seeking a job, sending out resumes, going on interviews, that sort of thing. Okay. So if you think about that, 100% of the population doesn't do that, right? So people this is just very aggregated. We're not disaggregating by age, right? So, infants aren't actively seeking jobs or employed. The very old are typically not doing that, whatever, right? So, there's some normal participation rate. It's around right now for the US, it's about 63%, maxed out around 67%. This is all ages, gender, all that stuff. So, you kind of know what this is. You could make it a clean number like 0.7 round up if you wanted, and just say some fraction of the population is looking for work or is employed. Okay, so this is, they call it their base labor force. Okay. All right. What do we have here? So, again, we're trying to guess what these guys are doing, but here we have the labor force to job ratio. So here's our labor force, or at least the base labor force. I'm a little bit unclear as to why we're not going from here over here, but at any rate, it doesn't matter. How are we getting the jobs part in here? The denominator. Okay, well, firms are offering jobs. Okay, and there's jobs per business firm here. So on average, a business will offer or employ so many people. So jobs means that they're being employed, they're working. So there's no flow of being hired. If you go over here, there's a hiring rate, right? If you remember this model, there's a hiring rate before they're employed. There's no such thing here. It's just that business firms offer so many jobs, so here's people employed or looking for work, and here's the number of people working, if you will, right? So if this is less than this, then there's unemployed people, and vice versa. If there's more jobs than people in the labor force, then there's excess. The businesses are looking for people. Okay. Yeah, Nasia, go ahead.
Oh, I just thought if we were gonna accurately model the economic sector, that in jobs we should also include maybe public and nonprofit sector jobs, depending on how where it if it was in DC, nonprofit jobs are a pretty big percentage of the jobs, for example. So depending on the region, you might want to model other sectors, and you definitely want to model healthcare sector jobs.
Well, that might be step 5. I think step 1 is just to get an economic sector running, generating an oscillation, because the question is where to intervene to, at a minimum, reduce Lyme disease, right? It might be an increased dog adoptions and, or whatever, right? So it might be multi-attribute. So to start this, because we could disaggregate different kinds of businesses, profit, nonprofit, different sectors, we can different age groups, different income levels, 100%. Now we're modeling the system, not the problem. So it's this struggle for detail versus getting to the minimum structure that gets us to answer the question we're trying to answer, or at least a first cut. You can also always make things more complicated later, right? But I wouldn't start with more complicated. I'd start with less complicated. The other thing is, what does the client want to see? You know, if you're now, this is just starter dough, right? We're just trying to get an idea as to how to proceed, right? So if the client, let's say we fiddled with this thing and got a working sector in whatever that means, and we show it to our client or clients, if they start saying, well, where's the nonprofits? Where's the healthcare? Where's the whatever? Okay, and then you say, well, that's really not necessary for the problem statement you've given me. And I've had this happen to me more than once. The response I get is, I don't care. I want to see that stuff in the model. And I will say, well, you don't need it in there, and it's going to cost you more. It's going to take me more time to do it, blah, blah. And they go, I don't care. I want to see that in the model. So what's the right answer? There is no right answer in terms of the amount of detail that we want to have, but I would err on the side of less detail at the beginning. With the knowledge, you can always make it more sophisticated later. Okay, go ahead, Nejla.
Yeah, I was just thinking that if we are going to model feedback loops in the economic sector, then we're probably talking about more sick people, maybe, you know, like you mentioned, dropping productivity, possibly decreasing profits, which then could lead to job losses. And so that mostly happens in the private sector, although I guess there are some probably indirect effects on employment in other sectors when private employment, you know, changes. But then like in the healthcare sector, I'm thinking, you know, the feedback loops there are going to be more concerned with the goal of health, right? Because once you start getting doctors and nurses who have Lyme disease, then, you know, yeah, you could have some more complex health interactions occurring there. You could have understaffing.
So just modeling that, not counting ticks and shelter dogs and feral dogs and own dogs and such. How much time and how big of a sector would that be? How long would it take you to do that, do you think?
Well, again, it just really comes back to what the problem is and what the interactions are that you're trying to model. But if you
Yep.
are looking for feedback loops within the economy, I would suggest that profit needs to be in there somewhere.
Got it. Okay. Now, I'm also reminded of the first time I met Jay Forrester as a student. I think I told you guys the story. And he said, you know, who are you? And like, why are you here? And I was all enthusiastic. I had this great idea, blah, 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 blah. And he's going, And then I finished explaining who I was and what I wanted to do. And there was this awkward silence where it turns out he was thinking. I didn't know what to make of it at that time. And then his response was, well, if you can do all of that with 5 stocks, he said levels, 5 levels, 5 levels or less, you're an expert. I modeled the world with 5 levels. And then he walked away. So, and at the time he said that, I didn't know what to make of that. But as I reflected on it over the years, what he was telling me is, yeah, you're giving me blah, 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 blah. Make it as simple as you can. So, yeah. So what I tell people when they're giving me a list of stuff that should be in the model, I say, write it down. We'll get to it. Don't lose the ideas. Don't lose your thoughts. Always good to have it on hand, but let's start simple and we'll go from there. All right. So let's talk our way through some of the other stuff that's in here and just sort of trying to figure out what these guys were saying. Remember, we look for stocks and flows, limiting factors, right? So what do we got here? As there's this labor force to jobs ratio. So when there's more people than jobs, or more people in labor force than there are jobs, that suggests that there's unemployed people, which is not good. That's economic bad, because they're in the labor force, and they're either working or want to work, and they're not working. And if it's the other way around, then the labor market is tight, and businesses are saying, "Hey, there's too much. There's not wages in here, but it's hard to get people. We have openings, right? Vacancies, it would be called." So what happens then? Well, there's a perception here. So that's a smooth. Have we seen a smooth before? Now it doesn't really look like it. We know it's a stock because of the rectangle. Remember, this is old school. This is 1980 system dynamics. But have we seen a smooth here? A first order information delay. Have we seen that before? The answer is yes. Real quick here.
Is that what you have going on in the beer game?
Right here. Now, in your defense, you have seen this, but in your defense, it doesn't look like that, right? So this is one of the reasons Khalid in 551, doesn't he have you try and learn Dynamo and be able to translate Dynamo stuff into its modern version?
Yeah, that was our first assignment.
Sorry?
That was our first assignment.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's not like, well, why is the guy making us do that? It's a good thing to know, to kind of be familiar with the old, way of doing things. This was not done with Estella, this diagram. I still have my template here. I don't know if you can see this stupid thing. That's how we used to draw these things, literally on a sheet of paper like that, right? And invariably, you use the wrong size rectangles. And when you got to the edge of the paper, you didn't have enough room. You had to redo it, right? And you're hand drawing the little dotted lines and stuff. So, so this is old school, right? So you just kind of have to know that this is a first order information delay. So it's smoothing the information, or forming a perception or an opinion about economic employment conditions in this area. And then we have the effect of availability on in-migration. Okay, so there's a normal labor force to jobs ratio, and then the perception of what it is. So we're going to do a table function, right? And we always want, on the horizontal axis, we want a ratio, right? And there's going to be some effect that tunes down in-migration when there's no jobs, right? Or slows it down, right? Okay, and goes the other way if there are jobs. You'd have to figure out a table function. Okay, what else? Same thing over here. Labor force to jobs ratio relative to the normal one goes into a table function here. How do I know it's a table function? I don't know how I know. I just know. It's got to be, because you're going to have a ratio here. And that's going to influence the business creation fraction. So again, when there's available workers, it's going to tune up the creation of new businesses. And when workers are unavailable, it's going to slow down the creation of new businesses. But businesses are dissolved. They have some average lifespan here, some fraction that's always goes away. Okay. Now, the other thing that it looks like they were trying to do is to say that the labor force to jobs ratio relative to what it normally does influences. See, how did I know this? These are table functions. I guess the E means effect, effect, effect. That tells me it's a table function. It's going to influence the labor force. So this is so what they're doing is this is the base labor force or the initial labor force. And then that'll be adjusted by the effect of the labor force to jobs ratio relative to normal on participation in the economy. In other words, if there's not any jobs around to have, you withdraw from the labor force. You say, why bother sending resumes around? There's nothing here. So it'll contract the labor force participation rate or the labor force. All right, let's tap the brakes there. Does everybody kind of understand the idea there? So those guys, and admittedly, that was a long time, it's 40 whatever years, 44 years ago. I have no idea why they did it. Probably some banker gave them a couple bucks to do it for their newsletter or something. And they're not going to model the entire Florida economy, right? They're going to just try to get an idea of how the business activity and population would grow in the state of Florida. So what are the base factors, the minimalist set of factors that could represent that, right? So is anything there alarming? I'm not saying it's missing this sector or whatever, but in terms of, does anything there sound silly? Or, like you're throwing in something there just to make it do something? Anything?
I didn't think anything seems extraneous, but I would also, this seems to be all about employment, and I think maybe income should be included if we're trying to model the economic sector for this problem.
Yeah. So if you have income, you're probably going to have income groups, right? Income classes, and that might ultimately be a good thing to do, because I'm going to guess the poorer people are more likely to release a dog than take it to a shelter, or bring in a feral dog instead of I don't know if you have to purchase it from a shelter. Sometimes there's a fee, I guess. What we don't have, by the way, what we don't have in the model, seems to me, it occurs to me, is, where'd it go? I didn't close that, did I? Oh, whatever. I don't know what our modules. We don't have a breeder sector where people say, I don't want to take in a feral dog. Who the hell knows where it's been? I don't want to go to a shelter because it's probably a mutt. I want a purebred, whatever. And so I'm going to go to a breeder. We don't have that in there. Now, how much of an impact that is, I don't know. Ennis, go ahead.
So is it possible that we can factor in the cost of human cases in terms of having Lyme disease, and also the cost in treating or preventing the Lyme disease in these animals? And
yeah, 100%. And that's I think we're going to do that, because I think the audience for this would be, let's say, insurance executives or politicians who are, have a budget, state budget or whatever, and they're always looking to cut costs, particularly healthcare costs, right? So, if you could say to them, if you spend, pick a number, I don't know, pick the number, $500,000 spaying and neutering dogs, you'll save $5 million in Lyme disease, expenses, in terms of the cost of treating the people and lost economic time or whatever, right? And they don't necessarily think about that. And I don't know if that's the leverage point or not. Where do you squeeze on the system to get the biggest bang for the buck, right? But that's the kind of thing where somebody would say, oh, we wouldn't have known that without a model. And you can kind of put some numbers on that. Typically, I like to model the physical flows, the people go here, the dogs go there, the widgets go here, that sort of stuff first. Then add in the financials, sort of a layer on top of the physical stuff moves around, and then the money sort of co-flows with the physical stuff. And then lastly, I like to see if there's any psychological decision-making enhancements that I can make that would make it more interesting or useful, right? So that would be kind of the second layer of stuff, but the financials are, yeah, 100% important, right? Okay.
Just as a little footnote on that comment and idea, during the COVID pandemic, there was a minor panic for a little while when the coronavirus was detected in domestic cats. And we were wondering whether it was going to be contagious to people who own domestic cats. And it turned out it's not. But before COVID hit, we used to regularly vaccinate cats against coronavirus. We don't do that anymore now, just because there's concerns about those viruses converting and becoming potentially pathogenic to people. But just imagine if you did have something like the coronavirus that mutated and it was capable of infecting domestic cats and then transmitting that to people, wouldn't the strategy make sense of, let's stop this in the animal population before it infects people? And it doesn't have to be something as economically impactful as COVID, but you kind of get the strategy idea, I think. I think Annis was on that.
What's interesting is some years ago, I did consulting for Homeland Security. And I had to go down to Washington for security briefings and all that. It was the kind of thing where you couldn't take your laptop or your cell phone into the room. And it was I don't know, Faraday cage or whatever the hell they had us in. So there couldn't be any communication. And I thought I would hear all sorts of, this terrorist cell here and this bomb threat there was intercepted and Interpol is tracking these spies or whatever. None of that. It was all pandemic stuff. We're watching the bird flu here and the chicken flu there and the whatever. It was all pandemic stuff, which it never occurred to me that was like a threat to the security of the homeland, but what we learned from COVID, it was, right? So that's a big concern, Suzanne, about, if this stupid COVID thing would become whatever the word is to transmit to humans from cats or whatever, or mutates or whatever.
Zoonotic disease. Zoonotic disease are transmitted from animals to people.
Yeah, that's no good. So anyway, all right. So, okay, so it seems to me that we're just looking for starter dough here. We're not trying to say this is the be all end all model here. And we're just going to, where'd it go? Every time I turn around, these things disappear on me. Where did it go? Where did it go? Was it? Oh, here. What we're saying is this provides us with at least some starter dough here to get going. It's not perfect. We're going to have to tweak it probably. Is this something we could parameterize for a particular area? Do you think? Would it be possible for let's say a county or a state to get a labor force participation rate, rates of in and out migration, rates of business formation? Would that be possible to get that sort of information? Do you think? Or if it's not US, a province or, whatever.
I think it is definitely possible to get that information. I know exactly where I would get it if I was doing it for my region.
Right, 100%. So for another reason why, okay, this seems like we might have some starter dough here, right, to get going. It would have been nicer if we had the plots and the code and everything, but we don't. And again, it's like, how do you reverse engineer it? Well, you just have to, it's a skill. You know, you can kind of figure it out, I think. You can also say, you know, do I agree with some of the formulations here? I mean, should we have a net birth rate in here, for example? Because in addition to in and out migration, there's, you know, people are born and die, right? Is this exactly, oh, one of the things I didn't mention here, they had a limiting factor in here. Population density also slowed down in migration. If it's getting really crowded, right, in this area, it slows things down because the prime parcels of land have been taken and you know, all that sort of stuff. Go ahead, Najla. Yeah.
When you mentioned birth rates, I was thinking, you know, at first that, wow, that seems like a very long-term effect. But then again, not really, because I think households with children tend to probably have dogs more. And maybe they, you know, they may tend to actually have dogs and then release them. Maybe if you have kids, you're more likely to get dogs on an impulse, like as a cute Christmas gift. Then I don't know. It's just some conjecture, but I think the birth rate could very closely have some important effects on this problem. Besides the fact that there are just more people.
Right. Okay. Right. So, good. So I guess what we're concluding is that this is okay starter dough. We'd have to reverse engineer it a little bit. Even if we had every equation and even if we had it in an electronic form, I don't think we're just going to use it as is. There might be some tweaking and what have you that has to take place, but at least we're not just staring at the blank electronic paper to get going. Okay, so what time do we got here? Okay. So what does anybody want to, do you think it's a good idea to let you guys try? I'll put that thing up on Canvas and you guys can try and reverse engineer it. And because I just don't, I'm reticent to just show you what I did. Then because you're not doing, you're just hearing about swimming. You're not trying to swim. So if I would put that up the paper, and I'll be at school tomorrow morning. I'll see if I can find the one that was published and put that up as well, if I can find it. Fingers crossed. Some of this stuff is like 40 years old or more. It's like, hopefully I didn't toss it or get lost in the shuffle, and you want to try and build a working economic sector like that.
So you want us to model that one that you just showed us? You're going to upload it to Canvas?
Yeah, and then see if you can put it into Stella and get it running and not making crazy things, negative businesses and what have you. See if you can get a working sector. And you can put in some exogenous Lyme disease if you want. Where would that impact the sector, for example? Add births and deaths or a net birth rate if you want. And just play around with it and see if you can get a working sector. And then we'll talk about it next time. You can say, everybody can show what they did and see if it gets us there, right? Yes or no?
Sure. I'm
Okay.
fine with that.
Okay. Okay. So, well, why don't we just leave it there? I hesitate to keep just showing stuff without you guys doing, because then it's going to be, just lecturing on how to drive. You got to start pulling out into traffic.
Did
Can you hear me?
Is that Suzanne?
Yeah,
Oh,
That's
yes, we can
flat.
hear. Okay, yeah, we wasn't sure who was talking. Yeah.
My internet keeps going in and out. Do you mind just writing up like what was the assignment exactly again? It was kind of going in and out as you were explaining it.
Oh, sorry. I said if I purposely didn't upload yet the mass and Coke paper, the D memo. And I said for an assignment, if you can, once I upload it, take a look at it and read it and try and build that model in Stella. And you'll have to, there's some guesswork you're going to have to do, not guessing like random guessing, but educated guessing as to, okay, there's an effect of this and effect of that. It's probably a table function. It is. What might it look like? Right? What should it be doing? It should be tuning a parameter up or down when the labor force to job ratio changes relative to its normal value, right? For example. So what might that look like, right? And do you see any molecules there with which we are familiar, right? There's certainly a couple in there. There's like at least 3 of them that I can see, right? And get it running and then look, play around with it and say, does this help me get to that reference mode? Because remember, we don't want to exogenously drive the economic activity with a sine wave. We're trying to get the economic sector to oscillate, something that oscillates. So we need at least one major negative feedback loop, right? More than one stock in it, right? So see if that gets us there. And you can put in exogenous for testing purposes, Lyme disease. Make the Lyme disease cyclical if you want. What does that do? Where would it impact things?
So was the name of that paper Economics and System Dynamics Unfinished Draft?
It is called it is D memo 3195-1.
3195.
-1, yeah, it was Koch and Mass, COCH and Mass. It was 1980, and it's called The Florida Economy, Elements of a System Dynamics Approach. And like I say, I will try and find I know 100% I had the paper. I remember reading it and having it in my hand. I just don't know what the hell I did with it. And I've searched online. I can't find it online. So I will try and find it in my office. I would not have that's something I would never have thrown away. It doesn't mean it didn't get thrown away when my office was moved or was stuck in between 2 things and got tossed inadvertently or something. But I will see if I can find it. And if I do, that has more details in it. It might have the code, but it certainly has the runs and stuff. So see if you can get a working mousetrap, right? That kind of sort of does what we needed to do to get going here, right?
They give you an index on the System Dynamics Society, but they don't like make it easy for you to just go access the stuff.
You mean the D memos?
Yeah, I mean, I've bought the CD at one point, but now I don't think the CD I have is everything.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but they're good to have.
Yeah, I can find my.
If you're going to take a one-off course in system dynamics, there's no need to invest in them. But if you're going to do system dynamics modeling regularly, you want to have your own copy of the D memos because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Right? Okay, so why don't we leave it there rather than I drone on for another half hour? I think it's better. Our time is better spent where you're trying to do that. Right. And see if you can at least get a working model up and running, even if it doesn't do exactly what you want it to, getting something going. How do you write a paper? How do I begin writing a paper? My novel. Put your fingers on the keyboard, start tapping something in. That's how you get going. Well, it'll be crap. So what? You can revise it later, but get going. That's how how you learn to do this stuff. You just try, and I think that's a pretty good, it's not like you got a blank sheet of paper saying, build a model of the Florida economy. That's no good, but take this thing, and it's imperfect, but you should be able to take a crack at it. I think that's a good thing to do. Okay. Yes, no, maybe so.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was looking at it for last week, I was looking at some stuff that NASA Shavira did when he was out of Binghamton, and he looked at the actual relationship of people, people coming in contact with the ticks and the transmission to the population. I wasn't thinking about the economic sector at that time.
Well, we will do that. We will get to that.
Yeah. No, it's fine. I mean, you'd have to economics, you have an economic impact or economics can drive the, population densities if that's of interest.
Yeah, I mean, another search you could do is ask, has anybody ever modeled Lyme disease with system dynamics? I mean, that's even more fundamental.
NASA did. He did some really interesting stuff in terms of like the healthcare system. It was really fascinating what he was working on. So, but he doesn't have some of the.
It sounds like you're saying NASA as in the space thing.
No, NASSER.
NASSER. Okay.
NASSER.
Okay.
How he was, yeah.
Okay. So maybe you could send that to me and I'll upload that as well.
Yeah. No, I've got a bunch of his papers. He could actually chat with us sometime too after we do some work on the model.
Sorry, you said he's at SUNY Binghamton?
No, he's not at Binghamton anymore. He's at what health facility? I forget what health facility, but I'm connected.
But he's available in principle.
we could connect with him. Yeah, he'd be interested. He's very good.
Yeah. Okay.
So
all right. So for next week, give that a whack and let's see what we can come up with for next week. And then I'll show you what I came up with. And we'll press on from there. Okay. Again, I'm going to give you back a half hour of your life back that you didn't think you were going to get back.
Real quick for Najla, do you have time to meet after this? No, she.
Do you want me to leave it running or are you guys going to do your own thing?
Yeah, if you're able to. I don't know how to do that.
I just won't. I'll make it so everybody can share. And I will go eat dinner.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm available.
Okay, so we'll leave it there. We'll see everybody next week at this time. Give that a whack. And a little late after supper, I'll upload the paper and you can have at it. All right, everybody. I'll leave it running.
okay.
See ya.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Hey Najla, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just want to touch base real quick on the homework, if you don't mind.